There are incredible women in the Bible, women that are full of faith, women that are brave and courageous, women that are perfectly imperfect. You know, that's a thing. You can be just perfectly imperfect. And we are so inspired and so blessed that we get to read their stories. So throughout history, the Bible elevates women above the status quo of society. God values women. And in a time of history when women really were viewed as like property to be traded and negotiated with, there's a woman that we read about in the book of Judges who rose up to be the leader of her country. This is Deborah. You can read her story in Judges chapter 4. And then in chapter 5, you can read a song that she sings that retells the story in chapter 4. And so put that on your to-do list this week. Read her story. You know, like most of us, Deborah wore a lot of hats. She was the judge, so that meant she heard disputes. She helped people solve their problems. She was passionate about justice. As the judge at that time, she was also like the prime minister of her country. See, she oversaw the economics and the running of her country. She was a prophet. She was the voice of God to the people. God spoke through her to her nation. She was a wife. She was a singer. Historians believe she wrote the song in Judges 5, so that makes her a songwriter and a little bit of a poet. She had lots of hats, lots of jobs. How many of you can relate to this? Yes. Well, in Judges 5:7, we find there's one hat that she actually claims for herself, and that's mother. Now, we don't actually hear that she had her own children, but she says, I'm a mother in Israel. She claims this role for herself. I'm a nurturer. I'm invested in the future of this country. I care about where we're going. And just a little bit of background. Deborah's the fourth judge over the nation of Israel. And those of you who've ever read the book of Judges, you know these are messed up people. They're like us. They're just so messy. And they were stuck in this sin cycle. Maybe you've read this before. Things would be going well in their nation, and then what happened? They got a little bit complacent, and they would cave in to the culture around them. They'd begin to worship idols, and then that just unleashed a bunch of things that fell from that, and life would get hard. There might be an enemy that came in to oppress them, and then, you know what? They'd get desperate, and they'd cry out to God, and what did God do? He heard their cry. He delivered them. And he saved them. But then it wasn't long before they fell back into this broken cycle. Anybody ever lived that way? Just in a broken cycle where you were stuck going around the same mountain, making the same mistakes. And you're like, when am I ever going to stop this craziness? Now, we humans have been living this way for thousands of years. And it is hard to break free from those broken cycles, but it's not impossible. That's good news for all of us. Now, when Deborah comes on the scene, Israel is in an idol worship stage of this sin cycle that they lived in, and things were rough. And the text actually tells us that they had experienced 20 years of oppression. I have a son who's 20 years old. This would be like his entire lifetime living under the rule of an enemy, under being beaten down, being oppressed, being crushed into the ground. 20 years. Whew, I can't imagine that. This particular enemy had 900 iron chariots, which that meant they also had horses, right? Got to pull those chariots. And they had all the troops and armaments that went with this fighting force. And in Judges 5:8, we read that there was not a shield or spear in the camp of Israel. You guys, these are shepherds. They're nomads. They are not trained soldiers, and they're in trouble with this enemy. Things don't look good. Now, in chapter 4, verse 3, it says, because this enemy had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed, ruthlessly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried out to the Lord for help. And God sent a freedom plan through Deborah. Deborah gets a word from the Lord to send a man named Barak into the battle because God's going to deliver them. So Deborah calls Barak in, and she gives him the plan. She says in verse 6, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men, lead them up onto Mount Tabor. I will send Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army." These are all the bad guys. "I'm going to send him with his chariots and troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands." So just imagine Barak is listening to Deborah's plan for the battle. And I just have to ask, okay, guys, how many of you have a woman or a wife or a mother who's really good at coming up with things for you to do? Anyone? Yeah. Yeah, there's David. I do this to him all the time. If you can't see online, David just raised his hand higher than anyone else in the room. Yeah. I did this to him just this week. So we were talking to someone, and I was like, "Oh, we should pray for you." And so we gather around this person, and I look at David, and I'm like, "Go ahead, pray." And he looks at me like, "It was your idea." And I'm like, "No, you." And this is what I do. I come up with these ideas, but I really want him to actually do the thing. And this is what happened to Barak. And although this was a message from God, practically speaking, the odds are not in Israel's favor. We got 10,000 men on foot without armaments versus 900 chariots and the troops that go with them. So this is how Barak responds. He says, "Well, I'll go if you go with me. But if you don't go with me, I'm not going." And can you blame him? If someone's saying, "Let's lead a bunch of shepherds into battle against these warriors," I think it's a good idea to take the person who came up with the plan. So Deborah says in verse 9, "Very well, I will go with you." And I don't know about you guys, but I feel a little bit of attitude there, like, okay, fine. If that's how it's got to be, I guess I'll go. And so that's what she did. She got up, she went to war. She went to this battle with Barak. The two of them went. Although she does clarify that since Barak basically made her put her money where her mouth was and go to war with him, that he would not get the glory of the win, that the glory of this win was going to go to a woman. Now, that woman is not actually Deborah. Her name is Jael. And how many of you know the Bible is not a G-rated book? And this is a PG-13 rated story at least. This woman is fierce. She's intense. And I hope you're curious, and I hope you go back and read that part because we're not going to talk about it today. So, then they're on the battlefield. In verse 14, Deborah says to Barak, "Go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" So Barak went down the mountain with his 10,000 guys following him. And I love verse 15. It says, "At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and his army and his chariots." And I just love that little phrase, "at his advance." I sort of feel like God's maybe just sitting on the edge of his seat going, I'm ready. I just take a step and I'm going to be right there. And that's what happens. God is true to his word, and Deborah's prophecy comes true, and God completely delivers his people that day. At Barak's advance, God moved the minute his people moved. Your faith, your brave step of faith, activates God's power to move in your life. Just that one step. Ooh, man, that's exciting. Now, I think sometimes we're asking God for help, and he's like, "Hey, I'm just waiting on you. I'm waiting on you." Now, today I want to draw our attention to verse 7 of Judges chapter 5. This is Deborah. She says, "The villagers in Israel would not fight until I arose, a mother in Israel." The Israelites, they're stuck in this sin cycle. They're stuck dealing with the oppression of an enemy until one thing happened. What's that one thing? Who got up? One person. One person got up. Deborah arose. Listen, you guys, don't ever believe the lie that one person can't make a difference. Don't ever believe the lie that you can't make a difference. Your actions can make all the difference. And Deborah's steps that day, they changed history for this moment. Deborah said, they held back until I arose. Well, that phrase reminds me of another woman in Proverbs 31, verse 15. And that says, she rises while it is yet night. In the middle of the dark, when things look bad, she rises. And something powerful happens when we get up, when we rise up. Now, that inspires me, but I do have to make a confession. I don't really like getting up in the morning. Yeah. Thank you for not leaving me out here by myself. I like my cozy bed. And this is a consistent pattern over my whole life. You can ask my parents. You can ask my husband. I like to stay in bed. I don't like getting up in the morning. My roommate in college nicknamed me the snooze queen. Does anyone else live with a snooze queen or a snooze king? Here's what that looks like in my life. I have great intentions the night before. And I'm like, I'm going to get up early. I'm going to do all these things. So I set my alarm. And then the alarm goes off in the morning. And I'm like, no, snooze. 9 minutes later, the alarm's going off again. And I think, oh, you know what? I'll just grab a protein bar. Snooze. 9 minutes later, the alarm's going off. And I think, it's a dry shampoo day. Snooze. 9 minutes later, the alarm is going off, and I know it's not just the girls. I know you guys do this too, and you think, if I bring tacos or donuts, no one's going to care that I'm late. Snooze. Right? Yeah. And, aside from this natural tendency of mine to want to stay in bed in the morning, there was a season, and there have been seasons of my life that were just hard. And getting out of bed in the morning felt like the most difficult thing I did each day. It felt like raising the Titanic off the floor of the ocean. Anyone else been there? When I read verses like Judges 5:7 or Proverbs 31:15, I make some assumptions about these folks. I tell myself, well, that's fine, because they're happy morning people. They like getting up in the morning. They can't wait to take on the day. But what if the story I'm telling myself is wrong? What if my assumption is wrong? What if they rise up, not because they want to, but simply because they believe it's the right thing to do? Now, I don't think it's an accident that Deborah says, I arose a mother in Israel, because I think mothers do this all the time. I watched my mother rise up over and over in one hard thing after another. And mothers do this in big ways, and they do it in everyday ways too. Because what woman wants to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, throw her hair in a messy bun, and take the 3 children to 3 different locations? And then pick up the preschooler at noon, bring him home to take a nap, load the sleeping child in the minivan to go pick up the elementary student, drop her off at music, pick up the middle schooler from soccer, drive through Chick-fil-A on the way home, eat dinner in the minivan, and wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and do it all again the next day. Do we want to be taxi drivers? No. Why do we do this? We love our kids. We believe it's the right thing to do. We do the right thing without the want to. Now, that might be a revelation to some of you. You might have thought your whole life that your mom wanted to do all these things for you. You may need to call her this afternoon and said, thank you. thanks, Mom, for doing all those things you did to me. And even though I bet sometimes you didn't really feel like it. Here's 4 things I've learned about the want tos. Desire to do the right thing is great, but it's actually not necessary. And we can always choose to do the right thing. Number 2, if I wait until I want to, I may never take action in some scenarios. Anyone ever had a bad case of the I don't want tos? I don't want to do my homework. I don't want to clean the room. I don't want to do the laundry. I really don't want to fold it and put it away. I don't feel like going to work today. I don't want to apply for a new job. This job is fine. It's not going anywhere, but it's okay. I don't really want to make new friends. I'm shy. I get nervous. I don't want to. I think sometimes, maybe in our younger years, or just some of us are a little more idealistic naturally, and it's just easier to get up and do things, go for it. But when we live this life for a while, we eventually encounter pain. We experience hard days and suffering, and life has a way of knocking the wind out of you. And it's hard to get back up, and when that happens repeatedly in our life, we can lose our want to, and we can lose hope. And if you're feeling that way today, I'm so glad you're here, because it's in these seasons when we lose our want to that we need community more than ever. And we need friends to come alongside of us and say, you know what, you can lean on me. Let me walk with you. Let's do this together. We need community, especially when we lose the want to. Number 3 is doing what I know is right, regardless of how I feel, is actually quite rewarding. I mean, when the room is clean and when the homework is turned in, it feels good, right? That's a great feeling. Number 4 is that sometimes, and this can be surprising, but sometimes the want to shows up, the desire shows up after I take the first step. And it meets me in that place. And even though maybe I didn't want to do it, I think, this is kind of fun. This is good. I'm glad I'm doing this. I'm actually even enjoying it. Anyone ever felt that? Where the want to comes when you take that brave step. No, I think that's what faith is. Faith is stepping out, whether or not we want to. And so that's a challenge I have for you this morning. To do the right thing, and don't wait for the want to. Let's say that together. Don't wait for the want to. Do what you know is right. Do that thing that God is calling you to do. Take that brave step of obedience. And don't wait for the want to. So let me ask you this. Do we really think Deborah just had a lot of time in her schedule? She thought, I really need another job. I've only got 6. I should have 7. Did she want to add warrior to her resume? I don't think she did. And then here's why. In Judges 5:21, Deborah says, march on, my soul. Be strong. And when I read that, I think she's having to give herself a pep talk. Come on, girl. Get up. Let's go. Let's do this. March on. Be strong. Did you know that you can tell yourself to be strong? You can tell yourself to get up. Come on. Let's do it. Let's take a step. Sometimes you have to give yourself a pep talk. Now, there's some folks in this story who let the I don't want tos keep them from moving. There were 12 tribes in Israel. About 4 of them show up to meet Deborah and Barak in the battle. But we hear about another 4 that sat on the sideline. In verse 15 in the Message Bible, it said, but in Reuben's divisions, there was much second guessing. Another translation says there was great indecision. Diverted and distracted, Reuben's divisions couldn't make up their minds. Gilead played it safe across the Jordan, and Dan, why did he go off sailing in the middle of a war? Asher kept his distance on the seacoast, safe and secure in his harbors. And it's great to read this because we know this happens, doesn't it? We so often choose safety and security over the fight for freedom. We choose the familiar. And sometimes we even stay in those broken cycles just because at least we know where we're going. We choose the path of least resistance instead of doing the hard work. But there's two things I want you to know. One is that freedom is always worth the fight. Man, when you find freedom from an old habit or a broken cycle or just a way of doing things, my family's always done it this way. When you find freedom from that, it's the best feeling in the world. And it's hard getting there, but it's such a great reward. Freedom is always worth the fight. And second, we will always grow up when we get up. We learn things about ourselves in the struggle and in the battle and in the fight of life. We learn things about ourselves that we might not even discover if we choose to play it safe. Anything that requires courage is going to bear fruit in your life. Maybe you need to hear that again. Anything that requires courage, it's going to bear fruit in your life. And we find in the final verse of Deborah's story, chapter 5, verse 31, she says, "May all who love you," she's talking about God, "may all who love God be like the sun when it rises in its strength." Now remember me, I actually don't see a whole lot of sunrises. It's true. But one morning, the whole neighborhood was dark, and I was up taking our son to football practice. And the reason it was me is because David was out of town. Because normally he was the one who did those early morning practice runs. But I got up, I was taking Daniel to football, and I just felt this little quiet voice saying, "Why don't you just stay up? Why don't you watch the sunrise? You're already awake. You're already out of bed." And, even then, I really didn't want to. I heard my bed calling me too. So I'm like, oh, the pillow, the bed, the sunrise. But you know what? I felt like God was inviting me to watch the sunrise. And so I did. I grabbed our folding chair, walked down the street in the neighborhood. There was still an empty lot in our old neighborhood, and I plopped my chair down facing east. And I waited. I just sat there and waited, watching the horizon. And the first thing I noticed was that before there was any light, any sunshine peering over the horizon, light below the horizon painted a thin pink line on the base of the clouds, like just the tiniest bit of hope starting to appear. And then that pink warmed up to orange, the orange into like a neon yellow, and then the white hot sun rose above the horizon with all of this color around it. And I remember thinking, this happens every day. Every day. It gets dark, but the sun rises. And it gets dark in our lives, but the sun rises. And it gets dark and we can feel hopeless and we can have the don't want tos, but the sun rises. It gets dark and life is hard and we can feel alone, but the sun rises. And we have this reminder painted in the sky every single day. Deborah says, "May all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength." And here's the truth of that. When it gets dark in your life and you rise up anyway, you discover a strength you didn't even know you had. Now, if that's not incredible enough, there's another reward for rising up that we read in this verse. Verse 31 continues, "Then, comma, after the rising up, after the going to war, after the battle, then the land had peace for 40 years. How do you get from 20 years of hard to 40 years of peace? You rise up. You get up. You face the battles because you know God goes before you. He does the fighting for you. You rise up and you do what you know is right, whether you want to or not, because you believe that God is in it and he will meet you there. And I love this, that it's not just Deborah. The Bible doesn't say Deborah had peace for 40 years. Barak had peace for 40 years. No, the land, the entire land had peace. Because when we get up, it's not just about us. It affects the people around us too. They feel it. They feel it. Now, I want to invite the band to come up right now. And as they come, I just want you to be aware of what you're feeling. Maybe you can sense that something's changing. We just have a handful of people that got up, that stood up out of their seats. But we know there's a shift, right? We feel it in the room. And when we get up, it changes the atmosphere around us. So I want to invite each one of you to stand up right now. I want to invite you, if you're watching online, and if you can, please join us and stand up. And let's just move our bodies in line with this invitation to rise up, to stand up, even in the face of difficulty and challenge. We can rise up. Who is waiting on the other side of your rising up? What's waiting for you on the other side of your rising up?